Record greenhouse gas levels helped bring temperatures to an all-time high in 2024, the UN weather body said on Wednesday, accelerating glacier and sea ice loss, raising sea levels and edging the world closer to a key warming threshold. Annual average mean temperatures stood at 1.55 degrees Celsius or 2.79 degrees Fahrenheit above pre-industrial levels last year. Countries agreed in the 2015 Paris Agreement to strive to limit temperature increases to within 1.5 degrees Celsius above the 1850 to 1900 average. The number surpasses the previous 2023 record by 0.1 degrees Celsius, the World Meteorological Organization said in its annual climate report. John Kennedy, the lead author of the WMO report, explains its significance.
One thing to kind of point out very clearly is that one single year above 1.5 degrees wouldn't mean that the level mentioned in the Paris Agreement had been formally exceeded. The Paris Agreement is usually taken to refer to long-term averages, some kind of multi-year or even multi-decadal average of temperature. So 1 year doesn't exceed that.
But he says uncertainty ranges in the data means it cannot be ruled out. The report said other factors could also have driven global temperature rises last year, including changes in the solar cycle, a massive volcanic eruption, and a decrease in cooling aerosols. Extreme weather wreaked havoc across the globe, with droughts causing food shortages and floods and wildfires displacing 800,000 people, the highest since records began in 2008. Ocean heat also reached its highest on record, and the rate of warming is accelerating, with rising ocean CO2 concentrations also driving up acidification levels. Glaciers and sea ice continued to melt at a rapid rate. Here's oceanographer Karina von Schuckmann.
As a consequence of a warming ocean and also as a consequence of melt from land ice, the ocean sea level is rising. You can see here an estimate from satellite altimetry starting in 1993 up to 24. There is a continued increase in sea level. And in 24, the global mean sea level reached a record high in the satellite record. So from 2015 to 2024, the sea level rose at an annual rate of 4.7 millimeters, and is compared to a value of 2.1 millimeters from 1993 to 2002.
The report authors state the long-term implications of the melting ice can affect the overall circulation of the oceans, which affects the climate around the world.
Jewellery collector Vivian Wang believes she spent over $138,000 on pieces from Chinese brand Laopu Gold. The jeweller is a major outlier in the country's luxury goods market, and with consumers dubbing it the Hermes of gold, investors are paying attention. The sector's been hammered by hesitant consumers concerned over job and wage security and the ailing property market. But having blended Chinese cultural elements with contemporary design, Laopu Gold is something uniquely homegrown. Among Wang's prized possessions is an almost $14,000 dragon medallion and an intricate box worth over $55,000.
I don't know if this shift has something to do with the pandemic, but it seems that people are seeking a sense of emotional healing and spiritual connection. Traditional Chinese symbols like dragons and phoenixes carry auspicious meanings, making them more than just decorative. They offer a sense of comfort and protection.
She said that long-term, gold is the best way to preserve value.
With global uncertainty, whether in the Western world, the US, Europe, or the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict, the overall state of the world feels unstable. In such an unpredictable environment, gold is undoubtedly one of the better choices for hedging risks.
Laopu's success has been fortified by its use of gold, considered a safe investment by Chinese consumers during periods of instability. And it's now considered a luxury contender alongside Western brands like Tiffany and Cartier. Laopu Gold did not respond to interview requests from Reuters, but a source with direct knowledge said its annual sales approached $1.4 billion in 2024, up from $439 million in the previous year. Since its Hong Kong IPO in 2024, its share price has surged tenfold.
Dear friends and colleagues, the 144th IOC session has elected as the 10th President of the International Olympic Committee, Mrs. Kirsty Coventry.
Dear President and my very dear colleagues, this is an extraordinary moment. As a 9-year-old girl, I never thought that I would be standing up here one day, getting to give back to this incredible movement of ours. This is not just a huge honor, but it is a reminder of my commitment to every single one of you, that I will lead this organization with so much pride, with the values at the core, and I will make all of you very, very proud and hopefully extremely confident in the decision that you've taken today.
In the eastern Congo city of Bukavu, bar manager Adolphe Amani is dipping into his dwindling stock of beer to serve customers. His main supplier, the nearby Heineken-owned Bralima brewery, has shut down. Heineken said the facility was hit by looters in the days leading up to M23's capture of the city. Amani said the brewery shutdown and the consequences of the conflict have forced him to furlough more than 30 employees. He said he can't remain open much longer.
Bralima employs us. We work there as staff and always benefit from Bralima products because they are products from our province. We must consume what comes from our province. We must consume what comes from our country.
With peace elusive, the economic impact has hit large and small businesses alike. Prices for food and essential goods are skyrocketing. Farmers displaced by fighting cannot harvest their crops. Banks are shut and supplies of cash are under strain. And some of the trickle-down impacts of the conflict are potentially deadly. Bralima's water consumption accounts for around 40% of state water utility revenues in South Kivu province, where Bukavu is located, the utility said. The utility's commercial service manager said the revenue shortfall had caused a shortage of chemicals for water purification. When those chemicals run out, he said the utility would be forced to halt operations. The leader of the alliance that includes the Rwanda-backed M23 rebels dismissed calls for an immediate ceasefire on Thursday, as his forces pushed deeper into Congolese territory. Congolese President Felix Tshisekedi and his Rwandan counterpart Paul Kagame had called on Tuesday for an immediate ceasefire after a surprise meeting in Qatar's capital Doha. Cornel Nangaa, the leader of the M23 alliance, dismissed the appeal and said his forces were not fighting at Rwanda's behest.
They have put prices on our arrest. We have nothing more to lose. We will fight until our cause is heard. Meanwhile, what happened in Doha, as long as we don't know the details and as long as it doesn't solve our problems, we will say it does not concern us.
Images shared by the rebel group on social media appear to show its troops posing in front of local landmarks and government buildings in Walikale. Reuters was able to verify the location of both photographs as Walikale. It's the farthest west they have reached in an advance that has already overrun eastern Congo's two largest cities since January. Congo and M23 were expected to have their first direct talks on Tuesday, after the Congolese government reversed its long-standing refusal to speak to the rebels. But M23 pulled out on Monday, blaming European Union sanctions on some of its leaders and Rwandan officials. Rwanda has denied backing M23 and says its military has been acting in self-defense.
It is with dismay that we learned some participants withdrew from the dialogue. Yet it was the only way that allowed us to hope for peace. The opposing parties, namely the government and M23, needed to meet to discuss and resolve their misunderstandings. For us, it was really the only solution to end this war that has paralyzed all activities across South Kivu province.
We can no longer access our fields or our bank accounts. The economic circuit is blocked and paralysed, which plunges us into deep dismay and disappointment. We really hoped that through this dialogue the situation would be resolved, but alas. We really ask stakeholders to prioritise the interests of the population rather than their selfish interests.
In Democratic Republic of Congo's rebel-held Bukavu, residents expressed skepticism on Wednesday about talks aimed at ending a conflict between the army and Rwanda-backed rebels. President Felix Tshisekedi and his Rwandan counterpart, Paul Kagame, called for a ceasefire on Tuesday. The surprise meeting was their first since M23 rebels stepped up their offensive in January, seizing eastern Congo's two biggest cities. But in Bukavu, resident Respect Burundwa said, quote, "This exchange will be truly useless," adding that some will think Kagame is seeking to only discuss his own interests. Blaise Nshole said the meeting between the two presidents, quote, "cannot bring peace," and that other political actors need to be involved. However, one of the main actors is the M23 group. It had been due to meet with Tshisekedi's government in Angola on Tuesday for talks, but then pulled out. Gains on the battlefield mean M23 can perhaps now afford to snub Congo's government and try to wring out more concessions. One analyst questioned why M23 would stop fighting when they have the upper hand militarily. The conflict, rooted in Rwanda's 1994 genocide, as well as competition for minerals, has killed thousands and displaced hundreds of thousands. M23 has previously called for the end to what it says is the persecution of ethnic Tutsis in Congo. Rwanda has denied supporting M23 and says its military is acting in self-defense against Congo's army and militias hostile to Rwanda. Congo's government says the rebels are terrorists and must lay down their arms.
Dozens of foreign CEOs will visit Beijing this month, and they're expected to meet President Xi Jinping at a development conference. That's according to a draft agenda and 3 sources familiar with the matter. The source said the annual China Development Forum will take place on March 23rd to 24th. It comes with Beijing eager to attract foreign investment as geopolitical tensions grow. Official data released last month showed foreign direct investment into China fell 13.4% year-on-year in January. Policymakers also want to boost domestic consumption to offset fresh US tariff pressure. A draft agenda lists CEOs from numerous major companies attending, including BMW, Mercedes-Benz and FedEx. The draft agenda showed top executives of several major mining, engineering and healthcare firms will also take part. While heads of Saudi Aramco and chip designer Qualcomm are due at the forum, though neither firm immediately responded to requests for comment. One of the sources said the guest list could be subject to late changes. A higher proportion of European CEOs are due to be represented compared to previous years. One source said Xi is likely to meet a select group of foreign chief executives days after the summit. They added that could include European and British CEOs. Reuters was not able to determine the list of overseas CEOs expected to meet Xi. The meeting comes in the same month US President Donald Trump imposed 20% tariffs on Chinese exports. It led China to retaliate with additional duties on American agriculture products.
Deep in the Amazonas region of Brazil, Maylene Melo leans on her red sofa to ease the pain of a contraction. Her baby is coming. Next to her is Tabita dos Santos Moraes, one of hundreds of midwives who deliver babies in remote villages of the world's largest rainforest. Relax, Tabita tells her. We'll give birth together, the two of us. Though Tabita is confident, 2 years of record-breaking drought have parched the rivers that connect women in these communities to the nearest hospital. This ancient trade has seldom been more vital in this corner of the world. Studies have attributed years of extreme drought to climate change. It's making river journeys to and from remote areas perilous, and adding to the challenges of providing health care to riverine communities. But this isn't just about more frequent extreme weather conditions. It's also a story about how age-old practices meet the regulations of modern medicine. Tabita calls herself the umbilical mother of more than 180 babies she has guided into the world. Her great-grandmother taught midwifery to her aunts, who taught her mother, who taught her, aged 15. Now she is passing the knowledge on to her daughter.
Aí eles podem vir me procurar, eu tenho sim mais interesse em aprender mais.
When the river is high enough, it takes about 4 hours to get from Deus e Pai to the hospital in Tefe. Now the trip can take over a day, if the river isn't entirely impassable. Maylene had planned to have her baby in a hospital where any complications could be more easily dealt with than at home. She traveled to the city weeks before her due date, all to avoid going into labor while stuck on a dry riverbank. The local government advises this approach as part of an emergency plan to deal with the consequences of the drought. But after a few days, Maylene realized she couldn't afford to spend so much time away from home. So she returned.
É porque é meio longe pra gente ir daqui, né, pra lá, ou então às vezes vai, tem que ir pra lá, e tem que ter dinheiro, tem que ter as fortunas pra ficar lá, e aqui não.
More than 1 in 15 women in the state of Amazonas have their babies outside of hospitals, government statistics show. That's about 4 times the national average. Maternal mortality is also higher in the Amazon region, one of Brazil's poorest. Public health officials haven't analyzed the effects of drought or floods on the figures. But midwives say women have canceled trips to give birth in the city because of the river conditions. Health officials say they need midwives to support those they can't reach. One told Reuters that wherever there is a traditional midwife, women don't die in childbirth. But the government doesn't pay them unless they complete formal training recognized by the medical establishment. Most live on less than minimum wage and often rely on government aid to the poor, a 2023 survey showed. Many volunteer knowing the families they help have no money to pay for this support. And there are further hurdles. As they get older, midwives are often not being replaced. Young women tend to prefer other paths, leaving many communities near Tefe with none at all. And yet these women can offer a style of care that's often absent in a clinical setting. On the day that Maylene would later give birth, Tabita prepared the charity broth, a soup made with manioc flour to comfort and strengthen a laboring woman. Another practice passed down through generations is making a paste with shredded manioc to ease swelling in the breasts of women struggling to feed their newborns. Maria de Lege Ponce Cevalu, a 72-year-old midwife in Tefe, even recites a rhyme to help the placenta along.
Santa Margarida, não tô prenha nem parida, quero que vos tires a carne morta da minha barriga.
A few hours after having the soup, Maylene lay on a mattress on the floor, drenched in sweat. Tabita watched her for a while, grabbing her hand when the time was right.
Eu vou conseguir fazer força. Em nome de Jesus, tá bom? Porque essa hora agora é a hora do teu bebê nascer.
Maylene pushed until her son emerged into Tabita's hands, adding one more umbilical child to her family.
Germany's parliament approved plans on Tuesday for a massive spending surge. It sheds decades of fiscal conservatism in hopes of reviving economic growth and scaling up military spending for a new era of European collective defence. The approval in the Bundestag hands Conservative leader Friedrich Merz a huge boost. The Chancellor-in-waiting would benefit from a windfall of hundreds of billions of euros to ramp up investment after 2 years of contraction. Germany and other European nations have been under pressure to shore up their defences in the face of hostile Russia and shifts in US policy. Merz's Conservatives and Social Democrats, who are in talks to form a centrist coalition, want to create a $546 billion fund for infrastructure. They also want to ease constitutionally enshrined borrowing rules to allow higher spending on security. The legislation still has to go to the Bundesrat upper house, which represents the governments of Germany's 16 federal states. The main hurdle to passage there appeared to fall on Monday, when the Bavarian Free Voters agreed to back the plans.
Despite a weeks-long multinational crackdown, scam centres along the Thai-Myanmar border, remain operational, Thai police have said, with up to 100,000 people still working there. Here is Police General Tachai Pitanilabut, who is leading Thailand's operations against the fraud compounds.
At the moment, we have not had the whole number, but from our evaluation, there could be over 10,000 people involved. It could be up to 50 or 100,000 people that are still left, because we are still seeing them operating. Their operations are still ongoing.
Tachai said that based on early assessments of some of the 5,000 people pulled out of sprawling scam hubs in Myanmar's Mayawadi area, hundreds went there voluntarily. That's contrary to widespread reports that the scam center victims had been lured there by criminal bosses. However, one analyst said that many people who willingly traveled to areas such as Mayawadi would later find themselves trapped in conducting scamming operations. Several former scam workers have described being trapped in the compounds where they were forced to trick strangers online into transferring large amounts of money. These centers are part of a Southeast Asian network of illegal facilities that generate billions of dollars every year, according to the United Nations. And although they have operated for years, they came under renewed scrutiny after a Chinese actor was abducted in Thailand in January. The incident caused a stir on social media, prompting China to send officials to Thailand to help break up scam hubs and rescue its citizens, many of whom have now been flown home. Thai authorities are now working to return thousands of scam center victims to their home countries, with many still stranded on the Thai-Myanmar border due to lack of funds. Protesters rallied near Istanbul's police headquarters on Wednesday, following the detention of Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu, President Tayyip Erdogan's main political rival. İmamoğlu was detained on charges of corruption and aiding a terrorist group. The main opposition, Republican People's Party, called the detention a coup attempt and urged opposition groups to unite. Murat Sapankaya, a municipal worker, attended the pro-İmamoğlu protest.
We came here to support the mayor. They arrested him unjustly, so we are here to support him. And as a citizen of Istanbul, as the people, as citizens of the Republic of Turkey.
The move against the popular mayor follows a month-long legal crackdown on opposition figures, which has been criticized as a politicized attempt to hurt their electoral prospects. İmamoğlu, who leads Erdogan in some polls, faces charges including bribery, tender rigging, and aiding the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK, which is deemed a terrorist organization by Turkey and its Western allies.
Üzülerek söylüyorum, milletimizin.
In a video posted on social media, İmamoğlu said he would not give up and would continue standing straight in the face of pressure. Erdogan's office did not immediately comment on claims that the detention was a political move. The government denies the opposition's charges, maintaining the judiciary is independent. It is meanwhile pressing to end a decades-long insurgency by the outlawed PKK after its jailed leader called for disarmament last month in what could be a big step toward regional peace. The next election is set for 2028, but Erdogan has reached his two-term limit as president. If he wishes to run again, he must call an early election ahead of finishing his term or change the constitution. Erdogan faced his worst electoral defeat last year when İmamoğlu's CHP swept Turkey's major cities and defeated his ruling AK party in former strongholds in nationwide municipal elections.
The human body was not built for spaceflight, and astronauts go through a lot when they leave the confines of Earth. For instance, the trek into space exposes them to microgravity conditions and high-energy radiation. So how do these factors affect an astronaut's health? The human body evolved over millions of years to function optimally in Earth's environment. It's an environment with relatively low levels of radiation. But that's not the case in space, where high-energy radiation permeates the cosmos. Exposure to this can cause DNA damage, increased cancer risk, neurological effects, and issues with cardiovascular and immune systems. The region of space around Earth, dominated by its magnetic field, provides some protection from radiation for astronauts on low Earth orbit missions, like aboard the International Space Station. But those traveling beyond, like to the Moon or Mars, would experience much higher radiation doses. Gravity plays a critical role in regulating bodily functions. In the microgravity environment of space, bodily fluids shift upward. That can cause facial swelling and increased pressure inside the skull. Those can affect vision. The lack of gravity's downward pull also affects the muscles and the bones. Less mechanical loading for the body means astronauts can experience bone density loss and muscle atrophy. The cardiovascular system also undergoes changes which may affect blood pressure regulation upon return to Earth.
And then into the spacecraft. Here we are.
Long-duration missions require astronauts to live in confined and isolated environments. This limits their social interaction and exposure to natural stimuli. That can cause psychological stress, sleep disturbances, cognitive performance declines, and mood disorders. How astronauts recover after returning to Earth depends largely on how long they've been in space. For short missions in low Earth orbit, about 95% of the biological damage appears to be reversed upon return, but the story is different for longer missions. While many physiological systems gradually return to normal, certain issues persist. One is a syndrome linked to vision impairment. There's still many gaps in our understanding of the health effects of spaceflight on the human body, especially for longer duration flights. It's an area of active research. Scientists currently are working on areas where they can come up with countermeasures to prevent the worst of these as humankind continues to explore the final frontier.
So once securely on...
Welcome aboard the recovery vessel. Recovery personnel are completing final checks.
And there you have it. The side hatch is open for the first time since September. And there we do see Crew 9, some happy waves, smiles all around back on Earth.
Oh, looks like we're getting our next crew member here. That is none other than Suni Williams. Big smile, big waves. She, like her other crew members, now will be assisted onto the mobility aid.
There we have it, some waves, some thumbs up, and some smiles. We're getting some views of him now as he egresses or exits the spacecraft.
Once again, some elation and cheers there from Butch Wilmore.
So after 6 months of zero gravity, you don't want to be slammed back into the atmosphere, but you start feeling this gentle push on your back, and that is the deceleration forces building up, the G forces. But it comes on quite rapidly, and they're going to feel up to about 4, maybe 5 Gs of deceleration, which is quite punishing after that length of time in zero gravity. Probably the most aggressive part is about 6 or 7 minutes later, once you're through most of the atmosphere. And then the parachutes open, and that you're still probably going just over the speed of sound. So when the parachutes start to slow you down and start opening, the capsule is swung around quite violently underneath. But it's, anyone who enjoys roller coaster rides, it's nothing worse than that. Yes, the first couple of days are going to be fairly rough because your body is adjusting very rapidly to gravity. Your proprioceptive system kicks in. There might be some nausea, some dizziness, some vertigo, and your bones and your muscles are getting used to that loading as you stand up and walk around. Your balance is having to kind of regain, and get a sense of where you are.
Evit Sapari escaped a burning train, through the window of a passenger's seat after a collision that left dozens dead in Greece in 2023. While she's slowly healing from the traumatic experience, she's still waiting for justice.
Νομίζω ότι σιγά-σιγά συνειδητοποιώ κι εγώ τι έχει γίνει.
I think I am slowly beginning to realise what has happened. The second year is the year of rage. The primary feeling is rage, anger, and I feel somewhat cheated and fooled.
Αισθάνομαι εξαπατημένη και ότι με έχουν κοροϊδέψει.
Investigators have cited safety failures and decades of neglect as causes of the crash. However, critics point out that no top politician has been investigated over the worst crash in the country's history, partially due to laws protecting them from prosecution. Sapari is among the 1.4 million people who have signed a petition to overturn that law, but its progress is stalled by legal debate.
Δεν κυλάει καθόλου όπως θα έπρεπε.
Legally, the issue is not going at all as it should, and I think that in the end, the justice system is not as blind and impartial as it claims to be.
Και αμερόληπτη όσο ισχυρίζεται σαν θεσμός ότι είναι.
2 years after the train crash, safety gaps remain, Greece's Air and Rail Accident Investigation Authority said. Last month, on the second anniversary of the train crash, hundreds of thousands took to the street to protest the lack of safety reforms. This was also fueled by a long-standing mistrust of the government and politicians, stemming from recent disasters and scandals. In 2018, a wildfire in Mati trapped residents and killed 104 people awaiting evacuation. Kali Anagnostou survived the fire.
We will burn, we will drown, we'll be killed, and no one will be held responsible.
Similarly, 25 people died in flash floods, which residents blamed on authorities ignoring safety warnings and poor infrastructure. That anger looks set to weaken Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis, whose popularity has waned in the polls since he won re-election in 2023. Last week, he replaced the transport minister in a cabinet reshuffle, and he reiterated a pledge to modernize the railway network, this time by 2027. But relatives have accused the government of a cover-up. Mitsotakis denies wrongdoing and says that institutions remain strong under his watch. After nearly 2 years of battles that have trapped residents and cut off supplies, the patients at Arban Jadid Hospital are in urgent need of help. Adza Babika, head of the Therapeutic Nutrition Department, said that the hospital received over 14,000 children under 5 with severe acute malnutrition last year, with another 12,000 with a milder form. Only 600 of the children tested were a normal weight, she said. A lack of nutrition and sanitation has led to cases of blood poisoning and other illnesses, and the hospital has also run out of antibiotics. Doctors have to ration the therapeutic milk and other products. Many mothers are unable to produce milk, often due to trauma resulting from the war. In Sudan's greater capital, warring factions have prevented deliveries of aid and commercial supplies, making goods unaffordable for most. Fruit and vegetables have also become extremely scarce. Aid workers say the sharp reduction of US aid funding is expected to make things worse. They say it will impact the budgets of agencies providing crucial nutritional supplies, as well as community kitchens relied upon by many. The United Nations says the war that erupted in 2023 from a power struggle between Sudan's army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces has created the world's largest and most devastating humanitarian crisis. About half of Sudan's population of 50 million now suffers some degree of acute hunger. Famine has taken hold in at least 5 areas, including several parts of North Darfur state in western Sudan. But the situation on the ground could be worse, medics and aid staff say, as fighting has prevented proper data collection in many areas.
U.S. President Donald Trump will sign an executive order on Thursday that aims to shut down the Department of Education, according to a White House summary seen by Reuters. It's a long-awaited order that acts on a key campaign pledge by Trump, who has called the department a big con job. Trump's new Education Secretary Linda McMahon has defended the president's plan to abolish the department in what would be Trump's first shutdown of a cabinet-level agency. The order directs McMahon to, quote, take all necessary steps to facilitate the closure of the Department of Education and return education authority to the states, while continuing to ensure the effective and uninterrupted delivery of services, programs, and benefits on which Americans rely. According to the summary, the order also mandates that any programs or activities receiving remaining department funds should not, quote, advance DEI or gender ideology. However, Trump cannot shutter the agency without congressional legislation, which could prove difficult. Trump's Republicans hold a 53-47 majority in the Senate, but major legislation, such as a bill eliminating the Education Department, would need 60 votes and thus the support of 7 Democrats to pass. Senate Democrats have given no sign they would support the plan. The Education Department oversees some 100,000 public and 34,000 private schools in the country. Although more than 85% of public school funding comes from state and local governments, the department provides federal grants for needy schools and programs.
Russia has been frozen out of international ice hockey competitions since the country invaded Ukraine 3 years ago. But after Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke with U.S. President Donald Trump on Tuesday, the Kremlin said Trump supports Putin's idea of holding matches between professional American and Russian players. Following Moscow's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the International Ice Hockey Federation suspended all national teams and clubs in Russia and Belarus from taking part in international events. It later moved the 2023 World Championships out of St. Petersburg. The National Hockey League, the premier league in North America, suspended relationships with business partners in Russia, paused its Russian-language social and digital media sites, and said it would not consider Russia for any future competitions. That included the recent Four Nations Face-Off Championship between Canada, Finland, Sweden, and the U.S. Russian players have continued to play for professional hockey teams in the U.S. and Canada. In a statement to Reuters, the NHL said it was not part of the discussion between Putin and Trump, and that it would be, quote, inappropriate for us to comment at this time. The White House statement after the call did not mention hockey, and it has not responded to questions about the sport. The IIHF last year said that it would decide on Russia and its ally Belarus's participation in the 2025-26 season by May this year.
A highly anticipated phone call between U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin ended with a limited agreement for Russia to halt strikes against energy infrastructure in Ukraine, which Kyiv quickly said it would be willing to consider. The Kremlin said Putin ordered the Russian military to halt the strikes against energy facilities in Ukraine. But Putin stopped short of accepting a broader U.S.-backed 30-day ceasefire that Ukraine has said it is ready to accept. In a statement after Tuesday's call, the White House said, quote, the leaders agreed that the movement to peace will begin with an energy and infrastructure ceasefire, as well as technical negotiations on implementation of a maritime ceasefire in the Black Sea, full ceasefire, and permanent peace. The Kremlin said Putin had raised concerns about a truce being used by Ukraine to mobilize more soldiers and rearm itself. Putin also said that any resolution of the conflict would require an end to all military and intelligence assistance to Ukraine. Later, Trump said on Truth Social that the call was productive, with an understanding that the leaders will be, quote, working quickly to have a complete ceasefire and ultimately an end to the war. Trump's overtures to Putin since returning to the White House have left traditional U.S. allies wary. Ukraine and its Western allies have long described Russia's invasion as an imperialist land grab, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy has accused Putin of deliberately prolonging the war. After Tuesday's call, the Kremlin said that Russia and Ukraine would conduct another prisoner exchange on Wednesday, trading 175 people from each side.
Mr. President Costa, Madam President von der Leyen, dear colleagues, thank you so much. Glad to see you. Yesterday, I had a productive conversation with President Trump. From the very beginning, Ukraine has been advocating for what we are discussing now, an end to attack on energy and infrastructure and ceasefire at sea, and we continue to support this efforts. Our teams will also work towards achieving an unconditional full ceasefire on land. Please support this. We need funds for artillery shells and would really appreciate Europe's support with at least 5 billion euros as soon as possible. Investments in weapons production are needed both in Ukraine and in your countries. Europe needs technological independence, including in weapons manufacturing. Everything necessary to defend the continent should be produced here in Europe. We must work toward this together.
The European Union says it will try to save Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, but warned it might struggle to replace funding cut by U.S. President Donald Trump. The U.S.-funded news outlet was set up to reach people under communism during the Cold War and broadcasts to Iran, Russia, Belarus, and war-torn Ukraine, among other countries. Trump signed an executive order on Friday aimed at gutting the U.S. Agency for Global Media and 6 other federal agencies, saying it was a move to cut back on federal bureaucracy. Grants were terminated for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and Radio Free Asia, while more than 1,300 Voice of America employees were placed on leave. The Czech foreign minister urged EU ministers to consider ways to allow the Prague-based service to continue, to provide news coverage in countries where free media is banned or in its infancy. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said it might be a struggle.
Now the question for us is, can we come in with our funding to leave or fill the void that US is leaving? The answer to that question is that not automatically, because we have a lot of organizations who are coming with the same request.
RFERL President and CEO Stephen Kappas said in a statement that the grant cancellation, quote, would be a massive gift to America's enemies. Journalists at RFERL continued working on Monday, with stories appearing on its website.
A U.S. judge has sided in part with detained Columbia University student Mahmoud Khalil in his battle with the Trump administration, which is trying to deport him. The judge denied a bid by the government to dismiss the case and said that Khalil must remain in the United States for now. But the judge did agree with the Justice Department that he didn't have jurisdiction over the case and moved it to New Jersey. That's where Khalil was held at the time his lawyers first challenged his arrest in New York. Neither Khalil's lawyers nor the Justice Department immediately responded to requests for comment. The case has become a flashpoint for President Donald Trump's pledge to deport some non-U.S. citizens who took part in protests against Israel's military campaign in Gaza. Khalil was arrested by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents on March 8th outside his university residence in Manhattan. His lawyers have said that he was targeted in retaliation for his role in advocating for Palestinian rights, meaning the arrest violated free speech protections under the U.S. Constitution's First Amendment. It will now be up to the New Jersey court to rule on Khalil's bids to declare his arrest unconstitutional and to be released on bail or moved out of immigration detention in Louisiana, where he is currently held.
Freed Ukrainian prisoners of war celebrated on Wednesday after Russia and Ukraine each agreed to release 175 captured troops. Moscow said it freed an additional 22 wounded Ukrainians as a goodwill gesture, following a phone call between U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. But just hours after that call, in which a deal was reached to pause attacks on energy infrastructure, both Russia and Ukraine accused each other of violating the new agreement. Moscow said Ukraine hit an oil depot in southern Russia, while Kyiv said Russia had struck hospitals and homes and knocked out power to some of its railways. This all came on the same day that Trump had a phone call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy that Trump described as very good. Before their conversation, Zelenskiy said Moscow's continued attacks showed its words did not match its actions, and that Russia was not ready for peace. He also said that the United States should be in charge of monitoring any ceasefire.
You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel.
The hour-long call on Wednesday between Trump and Zelenskiy was their first conversation since an Oval Office meeting descended into a shouting match in late February.
Intelligence sharing in terms of defense for Ukraine will continue to be shared.
Later, White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt said Zelensky asked Trump for additional air defense support, and that Trump said he would help locate the equipment in Europe. She also said Trump has moved beyond a previously negotiated U.S.-Ukraine minerals deal.
We've moved beyond just the economic minerals deal framework, and we're looking at a lasting ceasefire. Right now, we're at a partial ceasefire, but again, the president is sending his highly skilled, intelligent, and experienced team to Saudi Arabia later this week to continue fighting for peace in this conflict.
Trump has long promised to end Europe's deadliest conflict since World War II, but his outreach to Putin has unnerved European allies, who fear it heralds a fundamental shift after 80 years in which defending Europe from Russian expansionism was the core mission of U.S. foreign policy.
Yeah, thank you.
The main subject of this control, I believe, should be the United States of America. If we have such an agreement, there will be a list of objects. A list of objects. Civilian objects, energy objects, infrastructure objects. We will definitely prepare this list and give it to our partners. If the Russians do not hit our objects, we will definitely not hit their objects. Today, I will have contact with President Trump. We will discuss the details with him today. I think the details of the next steps. We really had a good meeting of our teams in Jeddah. I think everything went well, if not for Russia, which is always not happy when something goes well. For us, the red line is the recognition of temporarily occupied Ukrainian territories as Russian. We will not accept that.
A U.S. judge on Tuesday demanded more details from the Trump administration on 2 deportation flights that took off this weekend, despite his order temporarily banning the removal of people from the United States under an 18th century law known as the Alien Enemies Act. The Trump administration defended the deportation of Venezuelans, who they say were members of the Tren de Aragua gang. In a court filing, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement official Robert Cerna said 3 planes carrying deportees departed for El Salvador on Saturday, after an order by President Donald Trump. He added in a sworn declaration that only one of those flights took off, after U.S. District Judge James Boasberg imposed a 2-week ban on deportations under the Alien Enemies Act, a law historically only used in wartime. Since everyone aboard that plane had separate removal orders, Cerna argued that they were not deported under the 1798 Act alone. This was all in response to the judge's request about the timing of Saturday's deportations. On Tuesday, Trump called for the impeachment of the judge in the case on his Truth Social platform, without identifying Boasberg by name. Then, in a rare statement issued by the U.S. Supreme Court, Chief Justice John Roberts rejected Trump's call for the judge's impeachment, saying it was, quote, not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me.
Trump's post marked the first time since his second term as president that he has called for a judge's impeachment. To remove a judge from office, the House must pass articles of impeachment by a simple majority vote, and then the Senate must vote by at least a 2/3 majority to convict the judge. Republicans control both chambers of Congress, but do not have a 2/3 majority in the Senate.
The Israeli military said on Wednesday its forces have resumed ground operations in Gaza, and it said this is footage of their troops patrolling Gaza City. The military said its operations have extended Israel's control over the Netzarim corridor, which bisects Gaza. It described this as a, quote, focused manoeuvre aimed at creating a partial buffer zone between the north and south of the enclave. The move comes on the second day of airstrikes in Gaza, which have killed dozens, according to local health workers. Gaza health officials said Tuesday's airstrike killed over 400 people, marking one of the highest single-day death tolls since the beginning of the conflict. The United Nations said an Israeli airstrike had killed a foreign staffer and wounded several workers at the site of a UN headquarters in central Gaza City on Wednesday. But Israel denied this, saying it had hit a Hamas site, where it had detected preparations for firing into Israeli territory. Israel warned the onslaught was, quote, just the beginning. Both Israel and Hamas accuse each other of breaching the truce, which had offered respite for Gaza's 2.3 million residents after 17 months of war, which had reduced the enclave to rubble.
Hamas refused offer after offer.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that he'd ordered strikes because Hamas had rejected proposals to secure a ceasefire extension until April. Meanwhile, thousands of Israelis demonstrated against Netanyahu and his government on Wednesday. Many said the renewed fighting risked the lives of the remaining hostages still held by Hamas since October 7th, 2023. The war was triggered by a Hamas-led attack on southern Israel on October 7th, 2023, in which gunmen killed some 1,200 people and took about 250 hostages, according to Israeli tallies. Since then, Israel's campaign has killed more than 49,000 people in Gaza, Palestinian health authorities say, and caused a humanitarian crisis. Israel has accused Hamas of using Palestinian civilians as human shields. Hamas denies this and accuses Israel of indiscriminate bombings.
Israel killed scores of Palestinians and wounded dozens in airstrikes across Gaza on Thursday, the enclave's health ministry said. The following images are graphic. After 2 months of relative peace, hospitals are overwhelmed and struggling to keep up with the number of dead and injured. After Israel effectively abandoned a ceasefire and resumed an all-out air and ground campaign against Gaza's dominant Palestinian militant group Hamas. Stop this war, stop this extermination. They're exterminating the entire Palestinian people, says Butania al-Majeda in the ruins of Han Yunis. Israeli aircraft dropped leaflets on residential neighborhoods, including Bet Lahaya and Bet Hanun, ordering people out. The ceasefire had allowed Huda Junaid and her family to return to their destroyed home and camp out in the ruins. Forced to flee again, they had to seek shelter in a school.
We urge U.S. President Donald Trump to stop this war on us and work for reconciliation and peace. We don't want war. We don't want death. Enough. We are fed up. There are no longer children in Gaza. All of our children are dead. All of our relatives are dead. It is unjust.
In Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, Israelis demanded a stop to the war and a return of the hostages held by Hamas inside Gaza. Anti-government protesters scuffled with police near the home of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The protesters accuse him of continuing the war for political reasons and endangering the lives of remaining hostages. With talks failing to extend the ceasefire, the Israeli military resumed its massive bombing campaign on Tuesday, before sending soldiers in the day after. On Thursday, the Israeli military said it had begun ground operations in the north of the enclave, along the coastal route in Bet Lahaya, and in Rafah, which abuts the Egyptian border. Hamas, which did not retaliate during the first 48 hours of the renewed Israeli assault, said its fighters fired rockets into Israel. Hamas wants to move to an agreed second phase of the ceasefire, under which Israel would be required to negotiate an end to the war and withdraw its troops. The Israeli hostages would be exchanged for Palestinian prisoners. Israel has offered only a temporary extension of the truce and has cut off all supplies to Gaza. It says its military campaign seeks to force Hamas to free remaining hostages. Speaking to Reuters on Thursday, a Hamas official said mediators had stepped up efforts with the two warring sides, but no breakthrough had yet come.
As of this morning, UNRWA was able to confirm that an additional 5 colleagues of ours were among the killed, which brings the death toll to over 280 colleagues of ours, staff members who work for the agency. We were very, very hopeful when the ceasefire was in place because the people of Gaza have finally had a little bit of respite from the killing, from the bombardment, from the displacement, from the uncertainty, from the grief. The worst is yet to come with regards to the impact that the renewal of the bombardment by the Israeli forces is having on the civilians, on the people, ordinary people in Gaza, men, women, children. and the fear that more of what we've seen at the peak of the war in Gaza would repeat. And the question is, how are we going to let this happen once again?
Strikes killed at least 10 Palestinians on Wednesday as the Israeli military resumed its bombardment in Gaza. That's according to local health workers. The Israeli military, which issued new evacuation orders to residents, said it had struck a Hamas site in the enclave, where it had detected preparations for firing into Israeli territory. The bombardment came a day after Israeli airstrikes killed more than 400 people, according to Gaza health officials, marking one of the highest single-day death tolls since the beginning of the conflict. Israel warned the onslaught was, quote, just the beginning. Gazan Ibrahim Abu Shatat said Israel's renewed campaign, quote, threw people back into fear and panic, adding that the planes, quote, suddenly violated the truce, which was, quote, totally against human rights. Both Israel and Hamas accuse each other of breaching the truce, which had offered respite for Gaza's 2.3 million residents after 17 months of war, which had reduced the enclave to rubble.
Hamas refused offer after offer.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that he'd ordered strikes because Hamas had rejected proposals to secure a ceasefire extension until April. Meanwhile, thousands of Israelis demonstrated against Netanyahu and his government on Wednesday. Many said the renewed fighting risked the lives of the remaining hostages, still held by Hamas since October the 7th, 2023.
I'm here to protest. My country is going down by the Prime Minister, and the hostages are still in the tunnels, and we want them home now. And we want the democracy to be here, not the dictator that is the Prime Minister of our country.
Hamas accused Israel of jeopardizing efforts by mediators to negotiate a permanent deal to end the fighting. The militant group's officials said they remained keen on concluding the three-phase ceasefire deal, as signed.
Israel is taking serious and accelerated steps to annex more and more parts of the occupied Palestinian territory in violation of international law. In the West Bank, settlements are expanding at an alarming rate. This is coinciding with a series of legislative and policy steps that are increasingly allowing for land appropriation from Palestinians and further facilitating the extension of Israeli sovereignty and laws over the West Bank. The rampant forcible displacement of Palestinians from their homes and lands in the West Bank further exacerbates the situation. We have a clear legal pathway to follow here, confirmed last year by the International Court of Justice. The occupation of the Palestinian territory must end as rapidly as possible. All Israeli settlers must be evacuated, and all settlements of this territory must cease immediately. The international community has a strong mandate to take meaningful action to prevent annexation and ensure Palestinians' right to self-determination.
We are horrified by last night's Israeli airstrikes and shelling in Gaza, which killed hundreds, according to the Ministry of Health in the Strip. This will add tragedy onto the tragedy. The last 18 months of violence have made abundantly clear that there is no military path out of this crisis. The only way forward is a political settlement in line with international law. Israel's resort to yet more military force will only heap further misery upon a Palestinian population already suffering catastrophic conditions. This nightmare must end immediately. The hostages must be released immediately and unconditionally. Those arbitrarily detained must be released immediately and unconditionally. The war must end permanently. We urge all states with influence to do all in their power to achieve peace and avoid further suffering of civilians.
Israeli airstrikes started pounding Gaza again early Tuesday, killing hundreds of people, according to Palestinian authorities. Blasts rang out across the coastal enclave, threatening a complete collapse of the fragile ceasefire between Israel and Hamas that had brought 2 months of relative calm. Video obtained by Reuters showed injured civilians and bodies of the dead being rushed to hospitals in Gaza. Palestinian Health Ministry officials said many of those killed were children. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he ordered the bombardment against Hamas in response to their refusal to release more hostages and their rejection of longer-term truce proposals backed by the United States. In a statement, his office said, quote, Israel will, from now on, act against Hamas with increasing military strength. Hamas accused Israel of breaching the ceasefire agreed on January 19th and jeopardizing efforts by mediators to move on to the second phase negotiations of the deal. A Hamas spokesperson told Reuters on Tuesday it was communicating with mediators with hopes of completing the implementation of the original agreement to secure a permanent end to the war. After rounds of heavy shelling, Israel issued evacuation orders for multiple neighborhoods, including eastern Rafah, where families had just returned after the January ceasefire. On Tuesday, they packed up what remained of their belongings and fled their hometowns once again. Many headed to Khan Yunis. But bombardment there has also caused widespread destruction, burning displacement tents to the ground. We woke up to the sound of strikes, this man said. The tents were on fire, the women started to scream, and the children were terrified. Tuesday's strikes leaves the fate of the 59 hostages that remain in Gaza uncertain. Fewer than half of them were believed to still be alive. The bombardment was far wider in scale than the regular series of drone strikes the Israeli military has said it has conducted against individuals or small groups of suspected militants. The military said on Tuesday it hit dozens of targets. It said the attacks would continue for as long as necessary and extend beyond airstrikes, raising concern that Israeli ground troops could also resume fighting.